Well, good morning to you all. We're so grateful to have you here. I've been looking forward to getting these three people together for some time for this conference because I think this is a really important conversation, not only for this conference, but for the city of Waco and for Baylor University. And these are three of the best people to get together to think about the idea of sustainability and of stewardship and relationship between the city and Baylor and how we can work together. So to getting together and to think through these things is a rare opportunity because most everyone around this table, as far as I know, does a lot, and the chance to actually slow down for a bit and have a conversation about these things is rare. So really glad to have them here. I want to introduce them. Megan Henderson, to my right and to your left, serves as Executive Director for City Center Waco. Sorry, it's 8:30 in the morning. Which accelerates and steers development and collaboration in downtown Waco and the surrounding neighborhoods. She formerly served as Director of Regional Services for the Heart of Texas Council of Governments. She was a city manager of Rosebud and the Main Street project manager in Marlin. In these roles, she's focused on strengthening communities with emphasis on community and economic development, infrastructure and capital improvements, planning, grantsmanship and finance. She's a certified public manager, a certified economic developer, and has served on advisory committees for the Texas Department of Rural Affairs and the U.S. Economic Development Administration. She and her husband Troy have a blended family of 4 children and are members of St. Paul's Episcopal Church. We're so glad to have you here, Megan.
Thank you.
My friend Smith Getterman is a 2-time graduate. Two-time.
That's right, I came back.
Kept coming back, kept coming back,
Yeah,
kept coming
couldn't
back.
get enough of it.
That's right.
Very Baptist. I'm probably the most Baptist person here.
Of Baylor University with a Bachelor of Arts in History and Master of Arts in Communication Studies. He holds an MTS, Master of Theological Studies from Dallas Baptist University. Served as Baylor's first and only Director of Sustainability and Special Projects for almost 10 years and is leading Baylor in really important ways. He lives in Waco with his wife, Kristen, also a Baylor graduate, and has 2 sons, Baker and Henry. The Getterman family has been so important in the life of Baylor University and has been really important in the life of the Institute for Faith and Learning, and has come alongside us to support the Crane Scholars Program. So I want you to know how much we appreciate the Getterman family. And finally, Dillon Meek, who represents District 4 on the Waco City Council. Dillon is a graduate of Baylor as well, Bachelor of Arts degree in 2007, a graduate of Baylor Law School in 2010. He practiced civil litigation at Haley and Olson and represented energy companies and local governments from 2010 to 2013. He's now a partner and general counsel at Rydell Holdings, and he's married to Lindsay and is the daughter of Mabry and a son, Davis. He was named the Waco Tribune Herald's Person of the Year in 2016. It was not in your bio,
Yeah,
but I
added that
in. I couldn't help but to do that. So welcome to all of you. We just see this as a conversation between 3 friends about things that we care about. So I wanted to just ask you, just as a beginning, and feel free to interject and add as you want. We'll take questions later on, and you write those questions down. I guess I'd love to hear from you first, and we can just sort of take this in turn, about the present impact that you see Baylor and Waco having on one another regarding efforts of sustainability. And what is that relationship? What is that impact that we're having on one another? So whoever would like to begin.
I'll start just because I feel like I should start on this question. I mean, you know, it's interesting because we have a very symbiotic relationship. There are a lot of initiatives that Baylor has kind of been at the forefront of the vanguard on, and then there are some that the city of Waco has taken the lead. So that relationship in the almost 10 years I've been here has really started, to quote the great poet and philosopher Drake, has started from the bottom, and now it's at the top. I mean, it really has gone from one point to the other. I mean, it couldn't be any more different than when I started. And you know, I think that it surprises a lot of people because they are from, you know, they come from Oregon or Austin, and they have this idea of what sustainability in a city looks like, and then they arrive in Waco, and I think it surprises them to learn about just how close that city and university partnership is specifically about sustainability related initiatives.
You know, I think about sustainability in terms of, you know, going the distance. I know that kind of the theme of the conference is creation care, but I see that as pretty broad. And so thinking through the efforts that the city of Waco has taken and continues to take to increase economic opportunity and to introduce more and more of its citizens into economic activity and viability and participating in the marketplace. Baylor has begun, you know, so years ago, you would see Baylor, different student groups or classes doing specific projects. I think what I've seen over the 6 years that I've been in my position is an increasing amount of synergy between those projects and medium to longer term community impacts. So where you could probably come up with something that a class could work on and learn something from, it's not necessarily always been the case that that's been aligned with outcomes for Waco. And increasingly what we've seen is, and I cannot remember the Baylor staff member whose quote this was, but it's not mine. She said that what we really need to focus on is a partnership with Baylor being Baylor. So within the context of study, within the context of service, within the context of the Christian mission of the university, there are so many ways that we can partner. And I think over that same interval that you've been talking about, we've seen that grow. And when an effort to be sustainable, it's got to be something that you can keep moving even when you're tired. And by Baylor being Baylor, I think that that's more likely to continue.
To kind of echo that, I think that if you live in a city that has a university in it, the more the city government and that university can really build a strategic plan and really build thoughtful partnerships, the better. And what we have seen in Waco is, like Megan mentioned, class projects or just kind of some sort of, student group going and jumping into the community and trying to help with their best efforts, but it's not coordinated and collaborative and strategic that is really going to deliver the long-term outcomes that we're going for. And so I think that I think that we've seen, and I've only been on city council for 4 years now, but in those 4 years, I've seen significant growth in that regard. And so I just think it's very critical. It's very important for us universities and towns to build those kind of relationships where there really is a coordinated effort. You know who the go-to is for these subject matters. You know how departments are going to be reached. And I think that Waco still has ways to go with that. But I definitely think it's critical, and it's mutually beneficial to both parties.
I think one of the things that's helped us over the course of the last decade or so is we've kind of changed and improved the way we have implemented some of these initiatives. A lot of them are still very much student-driven or heavily reliant on student participation, but they are much more faculty or staff or administration supported than they used to be. We used to just have students go out into the public sphere and contact these groups or individuals on their own. And now we have kind of some support structure built in within the university that student graduates and that program doesn't die because there's a faculty or staff member involved. And so it is a more sustainable initiative and more sustainable engagement.
And hopefully on the flip end, on the other side of that, there's someone from the city who understands the needs of that strategic, outcomes-based, a productive service, and they're steering student groups and working with faculty to understand. Because I think there are people, Waco has a high poverty rate. About 37% of children in Waco live in poverty. The state average is closer to 15%. So there's a real need for poverty. Baylor students come here. It's a private school, so there's some affluence and really good kiddos that go here, and their hearts like well up to try to be helpful. And so you have these folks living in neighborhoods that year after year after year will have students come and knock on the door and try to be helpful to them, but they don't follow up, and there's no. And I think that's kind of like that culture is shifting to a much more strategic approach that really is delivering the outcomes that we're after.
Yeah.
That's terrific. What do you all see as some of the challenges and the opportunities of collaboration between the city and Baylor and doing some really concrete things for the sake of stewardship of creation care and sustainability and the sense of sort of recognizing that there is an integral reciprocal relationship between the university and the city, that they're not two distinct entities, but we're living and working and doing all sorts of things together. What are some of the challenges and some opportunities that you see? And we can take them in turn as you think of
I'll start because I think the biggest challenge is the city is a huge, I mean, when you talk about the city, there's obviously two huge groups. There's the actual city staff, and so there's like departments and tons of employees. Waco's one of the largest employers in the city. So there's a ton of staff, ton of like bureaucracy within the actual city itself, and then within the city at large, there's other stakeholders and nonprofit organizations and other organizations that are working towards that goal. And then you have Baylor, which is also large. And so I think the bureaucracy of it all, the sheer number of people working and trying to do good, it's just like the coordination to say, oh, this is the person, like just knowing who to talk to and knowing where to go. And Waco's a smaller community. I mean, it really is. One of the benefits of Waco, I would say, is that it's large enough to where it has real problems and real opportunity to see those problems solved. But it's small enough that you can be pretty nimble here and really kind of know the people you're working with and reach them pretty easily. But even with that, when you're talking about Baylor, the university, and the city of Waco, and then the organizations that are working separately in the city of Waco, it's just hard to coordinate, I think. And I think that's going to be a challenge anywhere. If it's a challenge in Waco, it's going to be a challenge anywhere because it's a pretty small community.
Well, and added on to that is the turnover. So, there's an entirely new student population basically every 4 years. There's also turnover among faculty, there's turnover among city administration, there's turnover on the city council. And so part of the thing is that the issues that we're tackling are complicated issues that very few people are I would argue, getting it right. Just because of how the calendar has fallen. I've been to 2 conferences with substantial portions of the agenda focused on issues of neighborhood redevelopment and gentrification. And I keep going to these sessions going like, yay, I'm going to hear some. Oh no. I mean, so you go to a session and the presenter says, it's really important to care about neighborhood redevelopment and gentrification. It's really important to care about inclusion. But there are very, very few people who can get into nuts and bolts about things that are being done and ways to get it right. So if across the country there's a lack of clarity of practice, and we're here locally, I mean, I would argue doing some pretty innovative things, but we're feeling it out even separately. And then the people are new every few years, and it's
there's
that's
not a playbook.
Huge challenge.
I mean, just to kind of put those two together, I think that, when Dillon talks about the bureaucracy, I mean, if you've ever worked in higher ed, I mean, you understand what bureaucracy is. And then if you have ever worked in the city, I think you have a really good idea of what that's like. So putting the two together is just like a nightmare of trying to get anything done. But, it's really, it's timing. A lot of it is timing. So it will take the Baylor machine months, sometimes years, to get to a certain point on an initiative. And we're ready to fire the trigger, we're ready to pull the trigger and make it happen on that initiative. Well, we've done all that work to that point, and now somebody is just now going to the city. Well, then the city has got to go through their process, and by the time they get through their process, well, maybe the person who led that initiative has left for something, or maybe the priorities have changed. I think that there's a lot of that happens, and a lot of missed opportunity just because of the way the two entities work. And I think the other thing that people don't talk enough about are the two different types of culture, whether it's within the city government or the city itself as an entity versus the university. We are graduating students, we're getting new students every 4 years, but I've learned over the last 10 years, those students really start to check out much earlier than that. When they get to their senior year, they're looking for jobs, they're thinking about getting married maybe, especially at Baylor. They've got 1,000 other things going on, and that really nullifies some of their interest level. Maybe that student that you've had for 2 or 3 years was really fired up about something and was leading the way. Well, then they get to that point of senior year where they're not so much anymore. And it's hard to explain that to somebody that doesn't have any experience working in higher ed or working with college students, that they're a senior in college and they just don't care. That sounds very generic and stereotypical, and there are a lot of seniors that care, but they don't have the bandwidth to care about every single thing. So they care about something, but maybe just not this particular thing. And that's really difficult to get across to somebody who hasn't spent a lot of time in this arena, I think.
I wonder too, just thinking about that a little bit, and the sort of missional vision that some of our students have, very often that they don't realize that the mission field is a mile away or 2 miles away, and that there's such important work that can be done day to day while they're here, and while there are certainly needs and opportunities thousands of miles away, the mission field is wherever you are.
Yep.
And I think that's a really important thing to continue to remind us all of. This is so helpful. I wondered if we'd think a little bit about the ways in which sort of begin to name some concrete projects that are underway that you see as really furthering the aims of sustainability, creation care, wise planning of the ways in which the city will grow, kind of new urbanism models, all those kinds of things. Begin to name those things that you know about, or even put on your wish list or dream list, some things that you hope that we could do together. I'd love to just begin to name those things out and have you describe them a little bit.
Yeah, I'll name two. One that I think I'll start with I don't know if that's necessarily negative, but it's something that people don't think a lot about with university and city partnerships. Is the city of Waco is going through a new landfill process, and Baylor is a part of that process just because we produce a lot of waste. And so educating our community here on campus about what that means for us and what that means for the Waco community has been a big part of my last year, because it's been in the paper, and it's a big part for the city of Waco. And trying to get them to understand, hey, part of the reason we are so adamant about recycling here or reusing here is because it impacts something like the city of Waco landfill. And that is kind of an unusual partnership, but it's definitely one that we're involved in.
Do you have the numbers about what our impact is on the landfill?
We put in about, I want to say 2,000 tons, a little over 2,000 or 2,300 tons of waste, so trash. But last year we recycled 575. So we're around 28-30% diversion rate. When I started, just so you're aware, and you can tell my boss, when I started, our diversion rate was 0.5%. So, we had months where we weren't recycling anything. So we've grown astronomically, not compared to somebody like Stanford or Harvard or wherever like that. We're not anywhere near zero waste, but for Waco and for Baylor, that's a pretty significant. And that's a big part of our partnership with the city.
So the city, when it comes to sustainability as a whole, the landfill issue really rises to the top of, I think, all of our minds, because, especially mine, maybe because it's been really a divisive issue in our local community, because our current landfill is filling up. We have to find another location. That is going to be really controversial for a community to be like, and this is the spot we're going to. Everyone around there does not want that. So it's really been a hot button issue, probably the most hot button issue in the community in the last 5 years. There's a lot of factors behind that aren't relevant to this conversation, but it really has created an opportunity for the discussion on recycling and so what's interesting about Waco as a city, I would say the city government and the city staff is probably moderately conservative, but really pretty progressive when it comes to sustainability and environmental consciousness. And I think at the federal level or the national level, that seems to be more of a left-leaning Democratic issue. But at the local level, I really think, you have these rancher guys who don't see it, who would probably label themselves as conservatives, who don't see it as at all a partisan issue. It's just the right thing to do, and it's pragmatic. It makes sense from a city perspective. We need to be stewarding this environment for the long term of this community. We need to be doing that, and they can make an economic argument for why it's important to do it as well. So it's been interesting to see guys like Wiley Stem, who we all know is our city manager right now, who is a good old boy, country rancher, wears boots every day, who is probably, if he was on this panel, he could speak to the technical side of all the things that the city is doing from a sustainability perspective that I would say is incredibly impressive because of the importance that he sees for that. So when we're talking about the landfill, though, what's also interesting about the landfill is because Waco, like many cities, has had like an urban sprawl, more middle-class folks have moved to the edges of the city, and because most of middle-class folks live on the edge of the city, also, where's the landfill probably going to go? Towards the edge of the city, because that's where we can get the land. It's not, you can't find a place in the middle of the city. And also, most people that are middle class, white in Texas that live in these suburban neighborhoods usually are conservative and don't really care a ton about the environment generally. When you're thinking about putting a landfill near their house, all of a sudden they are, hey, what are we going to do to start recycling in this town? And so it really is an opportunity to really start having a conversation. We've had a unique opportunity to really budget significant city dollars towards recycling efforts in a way that we haven't seen before. And people that wouldn't have really thought that was a good use of taxpayer dollars that have really rallied behind that because it's become a personal issue to them, which is life. When it becomes personal, all of a sudden it's important. So we've had a lot of productive talks about. We already have a really robust recycling program here in the community. Recycling, you get a big cart that's free for your recycling. A weird thing about Waco is it doesn't recycle glass, and so anyway, we're starting to really ramp up our recycling efforts. And from a PR campaign and public education to just really also increasing the recycling opportunities. Also, separately from just waste, the other thing that comes to mind when it comes to sustainability and creation, unlike other cities, Waco does not control the electric utilities. There's cities that do that. So, for example, Georgetown which is a nearby city, kind of similarly sized to Waco, recently went to all solar. We don't have that control at the city level from a governmental perspective, but we do water. We have two sources of water, our lake and our river here. Currently, it's all from the lake, but we have access to the river if we need it. And there's a real opportunity to think through sustainability when you're thinking about water. Equally, the city doesn't, but the county utilizes a lot of groundwater. And so there's a lot of important conversations that are to be had on how we do that well. I'm going to just hit the high points. And then the last thing is, I'm going to dumb this down, and probably everyone in this room is more articulate about this than me, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. But there's a level, the EPA regulates the amount of pollution that you put into the air, and if you exceed that in your community through an attainment, it's called attainment, then you are penalized, and there are things that businesses have to do in the community to reduce pollution. And so, from an economic development perspective, it's really important that we are making sure that our pollution levels do not rise to a certain point, or it's going to impact business in our community. And so we're eyeing that from two perspectives. One is we don't want our city to be like so polluted that we're hitting those levels anyway, because that's not what we want for our citizens. But second of all, there's a real economic impact to if we are penalized by the federal government for hitting those levels. And so those are a couple of the things that the city really tries to eye. And if we have questions at some point, I can go deeper on any of those subjects.
Just to piggyback off him real quick, the opportunity for us to talk about our consumption and our impact on the landfill on our campus has been great. Because we don't politicize sustainability here at Baylor. I would not have a job if I did. And it just wouldn't be successful because of the demographics of the folks that go here. We talk about sustainability from a creation care, from a care for God's creation standpoint. I tell people all the time, I wouldn't be good at my job or be able to do my job if I was at University of Texas or Georgia or wherever else, because I feel a special calling and connection to talking about stewardship through God's creation. And one of the things that we've really done that I've started doing in the last year or two, even before the landfill, it just hit me that we've been talking about sustainability in a very environmental way, which is pretty obvious, but for Christians especially, it really connects to loving your neighbor. And our consumption is a direct connection to loving our neighbor. And so now when I speak in our chapel or if I guest lecture in classes, I don't really even talk about, I mention climate change, but I really connect it to, hey, one of the great commandments is love your neighbor as yourself. And how better to love your neighbor as yourself than to start thinking about the way you consume and the way your consumption impacts that neighbor, even if you're thinking about the person across the globe. And that's really resonated with our students, and I've just started doing that. And so I'm starting to kind of see the first fruits of that. And I think that's been part of the conversation that we've had with the city, at least from the Baylor perspective. And one other thing that I know Megan is interested in that I am excited about moving forward is the potential as we're going to redo some of the highway that runs through Waco. I'm excited about extending or renovating or changing the way the university and the city connects, because that connection is so important. It's important for us to be able to get students across to downtown, not just by driving their cars, because a lot of our students don't have cars, but by riding a shuttle or their bikes or walking. And that's not something we do a very good job of right now, but I think you come back in 5 to 10 years and it'll be totally different. And that will be an economic driver, but it's also huge for sustainability.
Sure.
I think at the risk of belaboring the point, I think that it's really really significant, really unusual, and a huge opportunity that Waco and Baylor both, for their own reasons, have this this combination of conservatism and progressivism. I think it's very similar. The root of conserve and conservative are the same, and it's this idea that we're not being good stewards if we're wasteful. And so among the things that I think we can partner on, thinking about air quality was one of my programs when I was at COG. And one of the big issues with it is that nobody understands it. It's not understood.
As you can tell from my
No, you did great, but out on the street, nobody understands it. Nobody understands that drive-throughs are terrible, or mowing your lawn in the heat of the day, or even in the morning, is not a good idea. There are all these little things, and even if they did understand, hey, this is bad for air quality, it's difficult to connect that back to how it's impactful to people's lives. And so maybe that's an opportunity for Baylor. It's a communications challenge. It's a marketing challenge. To help those kinds of non-intuitive pieces of awareness percolate down to the household level where decision making takes place. Thinking too about the landfill and the wastefulness of consumption. That's another area where I think people at the household level do not understand how recycling works, You know, just because a pizza box is made of cardboard doesn't mean that you can put it in the recycling for cardboard. And if you do, it's going to contaminate everything else in that bin, and then that's going to have to be thrown out. And so certainly there are geological ramifications of where you put the landfill. Certainly there are environmental ramifications of groundwater and the water table and the different consumptions. There are legal ramifications of Waco's water rights. And so there are all of these different layers of academic pursuit that are linked not only to real world issues, but like existential issues, survival issues. Right. Is Waco going to be okay? And thinking through another one of those conservative/progressive points, Waco is really committed to doing something about generational poverty, not out of a bleeding heart, although there are, you know, what I have seen in my fellow citizens of Waco is a tremendous amount of sympathy and compassion. But there's a real economic benefit to everybody, for everybody to participate in the economy. You know, we were talking about exercising before class, and there's this evil, hateful thing called an assault bike, and I see, and
The CrossFit
and
This does not sound very sustainable.
no, it's so bad, it's evil, and so your arms are going like this while your legs are pedaling, and I also, because I have reached a certain age, am periodically injured, and so the thing about the assault bike is that you have to be able to use your arms and your legs. Your legs have all the big muscles, but your arms are really important too. If 30% of our population is spending all of their energy just surviving, then we're trying to ride that dadgum assault bike with only our arms or only our legs. The whole economy will work better if and it's a sustainability issue. It's an efficiency issue. Those folks, this is incredibly politically incorrect, and I don't mean it like this, but they're creating drag because they're not participating in the economy at the level to which they would like to be. And so figuring
As
out...
a business owner, what we want them to be. In
Right.
other words, like I'm a partner in a restaurant here in town that sells tacos, and I want people to have money to go buy those tacos. So
Exactly, and
not only do
likewise-
they want money to go buy those tacos, I want them to have money to go buy those tacos.
Right. And they would like to be able to sell you widgets that you can, with your taco money, go and buy.
Totally.
I mean, and then that increases not only the wages, but it increases just the quality of life, the level of goods and services that we're able to have, the level of public spaces that the associated tax revenues can support, quality of life. And so figuring out how we operationalize what are essentially theoretical principles, right? So there's connection between the entrepreneurship school and the new grocery that's planned for Elm Avenue. But there are so many more things that we could do. So I would love it if somebody in geography could help us crack the GIS connection between demographics and location so that we could look at how do we need to develop certain neighborhoods and what are the goods and services that need to be present in those neighborhoods. Similarly, within the core of downtown, what we've learned is that data about downtown isn't accurate because we're too small. And so how do we create some GIS layers that help us measure occupancy and vacancy? In terms of gentrification, I would love to have the GIS ability to go back over time and map the way that changes in property value in the central business district have created changes in the property value of surrounding neighborhoods. Because I think people have an emotional response that may or may not be borne out by the data. And the data are there, we just don't have the staff capacity to run those numbers. I mean, and on and on and on. Certainly School of Social Work has the ability to be very impactful. We, as an organization, are very limited by what our staff ability is, but if we were able to articulate a problem statement that has an academic disciplinary underpinning, how much more valuable for a student to solve a real life problem, and how much more valuable for Baylor to be able to tell prospective students, we're not just doing stuff for the sake of doing stuff. You know,
That's
we're
right.
we're changing the world.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the opportunity for a city like Waco is that it is small enough that your impact can be real and it can be realized. I think, in hearing this discussion too, I think the communication piece, it really is the critical, and I think that goes from a city perspective to the constituents and the taxpayer, and I think from a university perspective to the faculty and the students, that why we're doing what we're doing matters. I remember when I was in law school in 2010, and that's probably right when Smith was really rolling out his recycling initiative. And we used to have we could print an unlimited amount of paper in the law school computer lab. I don't even know if they have computer labs still. Is that still a thing on universities?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Well, so in the computer lab we could print an unlimited amount of paper, and then somewhere in 2009, 2010, probably right when you're about starting and ratcheting things down, they put you can only print this much, and then it charges your account for more than that.
I'm very popular on
And
campus.
then all of these big bins. But I was just I didn't understand. I was like, what the heck? But so there's a communication piece to students. The city put, and I'm not knocking that was the right move. It was just
your younger self was knocking it.
That's right. My younger self was. Because I wasn't educated or enlightened to the importance of it.
No, but he's right. I've been here 10 years, and there are still people who, professors will say, oh, I didn't know you were here.
Yeah.
It's I've been here. What else can I possibly do?
But I think that but my point is just you have to tell people, or another example would be the city put bike lanes in its downtown, and so many people were just what a waste of money. No one's going to use these bike lanes. But from a sustainability perspective and a lot of other reasons, it's really important that we have the infrastructure for that type of mobility. And there's an important, something that I've learned on city council, and part of the government as it's set up in Waco right now, the culture right now, is it's really easy I feel to do the right thing on city council. It's the biggest challenge is to communicate why you did that to your constituents for them to have the buy-in for that decision.
Right.
And I think that translates to the same thing for here. Smith's moved to limit the number of me who was reckless in his printing, would print ridiculous numbers of paper, needed to be communicated with hey, this is why this matters. And I think it's the same thing. So I think that's always going to be a challenge, is communicating what these decisions that leadership is making is, if you believe it's right as a leader, communicating that to the constituencies to where they have buy-in is going to ensure the success of that project.
We're in a difficult spot. I know we need to get questions, but we're in a difficult spot, whether it's the city or the university. I've been doing this almost 10 years, and I still tell people there is no real magic bullet on how to get students to hear what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
If you work at a university at any level, getting them all to open their email now even is a challenge. It's crazy, but 5 years ago it was, what should we do? Oh, we'll just send an email about it and we'll get some answers or whatever. And now they don't even open their email. Okay, well, let's post on Facebook. Well, I'll tell you from my experience, 20-year-olds don't use Facebook. Mm-hmm. And that makes all parents surprised because now it's cool for them. But and so now it's well, you've got to get on Instagram, and then maybe they'll see it. And it's just trying to chase that, that piece of communication. And you're going to miss a lot of people, but it's always something that's evolving for us.
That's excellent. I really appreciate your point about the various ways that the academic disciplines find real projects.
That's right.
Real problems to do here that can involve undergraduate, graduate students, but frankly, again, you think not in a callous way, but this is a laboratory for really important research and academic work, and it is absolutely and ought to be undergirded by our sense of our identity and mission here at Baylor.
Yeah.
But we have, again, promise and opportunity right here. It's a bit about clarifying on the academic side the mission field that is
right.
Waco and the surrounding areas. My last question, and I want to open it up for questions from you. A few of you are Baylor students, some of you are Waco residents, and some of you also have outside perspectives from other places that we'd love to hear. I'd love for each of you to reflect upon what you would hope for the relationship between Baylor and Waco and the things that we would do together would be in maybe 2050. So, and that sounds like a long time off, and in some ways it is, in some ways it's not. We're almost done with 2018, so 30 more years. What opportunities are there for shared space between Baylor and Waco? What sort of big projects or big ways that we'd reimagine the community that is Baylor and Waco? What are your dreams for that?
I'll start. I mean, I think that it seems to me that the ultimate Christian vision of heaven is the holy city on the hill, and I think we often make the wilderness as this thing that we connect to the environment, but really, if you're a Christian, it's the city. That's what we see as heaven, and I think that we can march towards that in some ways by really opening up our campus, our infrastructure, connecting it with bike lanes. I think that hopefully by 2050, our students who live in our neighborhoods understand and have a better understanding of how to live within those neighborhoods, because I think it's 65% of our students do not live on campus. They're living in housing that's off campus that we don't have any control over. We just need them to be better neighbors. And I hope that by 2050, we can have a community outside of this campus that is, it really is that vision. I think that's really the Christian mission, I think, for us to integrate well with our surroundings.
I'll go next because Megan will probably give the best answer, and she can. And
Megan thinks about this.
Yeah. So at the highest level, what Megan said earlier about academia and the city working together on various research projects, and I think that if there's a real clear level, and I actually hope for this in the next 5 years as well as 2050, but just a real clear pipeline, a real clear understanding of how those partnerships can work in all the various departments at Baylor and all the various departments within the city, and that there really is robust strategic research ongoing. So at the highest level, without being super specific, I think that is critical. It's mission critical, and that there's buy-in at the top down, the city, and top down at the university. And then I think that, one of the district I represent is in the core of the city. Baylor's not included in that, but Baylor's also in the core of the city. And my hope would be that there really are really healthy neighborhoods and a really healthy downtown at that juncture, with the range of incomes within those neighborhoods, and that Baylor students are living and working and playing in a very healthy way, to use your word as a neighbor, but just with like really robust and healthy relationships with the people in all of those different spheres. And it really is just like this sounds very kumbaya, but just a really beautiful space of just people from the university and students living and working and playing in this downtown, and not being like us and them or them and us, but really just like a blended, beautiful city where the relationships are allowed to be fostered.
That's excellent.
If that's possible. It's 2050, and that'll be someone else's problem by that point. So.
Well, I think that in some ways the city is figuring out what the roles need to be in some of these neighborhoods. And so I think in order to have a great relationship back and forth, not only does Baylor need to be able to participate by being Baylor, but the city needs to participate by being the city. And I'm thinking about things like early childhood education, which has been identified over and over again as a key leverage point where we can have better, we can have cheaper, more effective, longer lasting impact on lifetime educational attainment, economic attainment, resiliency, quality of life. That's the kind of thing that Baylor could take on in a long term and say, what is our ability to impact every daycare? What is our ability to develop a curriculum and deliver it for free to the people who work in these daycares, so that each daycare has a little bit better impact on the kiddos that are there? What is our ability to create a mobility system, a human-powered mobility system, where walking and bicycling is enough utilized that if you can't afford a car, you don't feel like a pariah, because bicycling is a respectable means of getting around.
And it's safe.
And it's safe
Right.
because over and over again, Smith knows all about this. The big middle of people would ride a bike if they felt comfortable doing so. There are some who are going to do it regardless. There are some who are not going to do it regardless. The big middle would do it under the right circumstances, and we just haven't marshaled enough political will and dollars around making those circumstances present. I think once you start using human-powered transportation for the shorter trips, then having a more robust public transportation system becomes a more obviously good thing. And the city of Waco is on the cusp of investing in that in a big way. Baylor participating and getting behind that, and having choice ridership of public transportation is, again, it's like the bicycling. If there are enough people who have the option to do this or not, but choose to do it because it is comfortable, it makes sense, then the experience of doing it doesn't have a negative stigma. And so the whole system becomes more sustainable. The way the campus is evolving around the brick, around the stadium, and then along the riverfront between campus and downtown, there are these opportunities for spaces that could feel just for Baylor to really be available, to be resources that lots of people can enjoy. And the added benefit of that is that people who maybe couldn't afford to go to Baylor aren't scared off.
Right.
And so people really do have a greater opportunity to participate. You know, Baylor has some wonderful summer camps for kids. If kiddos can participate in a university experience, if families can go to a play and participate in some of the cultural experiences because they're not intimidated by the campus. If Baylor students, so this is people enjoying Baylor just being Baylor, but if the city knows what they're doing, if the neighborhoods know what they're about, so that when Baylor students want to plug into something, there's a thing there that they can plug into. It's not, oh crap, we've got some Baylor students who want to do a thing, let's go find something for them to do real quick.
Right.
So everybody needs to be able to articulate where they're going, but I think missionally, the big work is already done in that what we're trying to do is really marvelously aligned.
I think the vision is there. It's taking the steps and enabling the people to take the steps in good ways.
And really, I mean, you know, a thing that academia does so well is document. You know, a thing that I've run into, I'm smiling at Dillon because Dillon's on my board. He knows that I'm bad at this. We're great at doing things. We're not so great at documenting them. And if you want to make an effort that builds over time and survives transitions, you've got to document not only where you've been, but where you're going, so that then you can slide that document to somebody else and they can read it and be like, oh, wow, here's how we plug in.
The roadmap.
And we'd love help with that.
So would we. Only some of us document well. Some of us. This is so good. Thank you so much. I want to invite you all to ask questions or make comments or suggestions or things that have struck your interest here. So, yes, sir. Tell us who you are.
Trey Crumpton. I'm exhibits manager at the Mayborn Museum, which is our campus natural science and culture museum. So my job is public dissemination of information, getting those points across, whatever the point is, to get across. It's something that is just part of my job, but it's something that if there is something important to the city or important to Baylor, that's where we can come in. So if it's difficult for the city to get the information out in a pamphlet in the water bill, or through the TRID, or through childhood education, or through an email to students, that's how we can come in. But it's almost like these are all special projects, and it's difficult, as we said, with student turnover and everything. You can't just give it to a student.
The current crop.
It has to be the right student. They have to, it has to be their goal to make it publicly consumable. So we have graduate students in museum studies. Like we said, there's GIS, there's geography students, there's environmental science students. It's not enough to just say, let's do stepping out and get out there. It has to be their goal. And we've done this a couple of times on different projects. But if that's where the academia can come in and say, okay, this is a goal between Baylor and the city and the museum, to say this is the information that we need to get out. This is the student that's in charge of gathering that information, gathering the resources maybe from the city, how to find the information, and the technology to use through GIS. I think that can be an avenue for a good partnership, is to get the information out. Whether it's just talking about trash in Waco Creek, or gentrification and how it actually, what could actually change things in the city. So I'll just follow that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The museum we didn't even talk about, but the Mayborn is a great example. You know, they're doing stuff over there that most people don't realize that they're doing unless they, you know, are talking to somebody like Trey or in the building. They've got some stuff going on over there that I know, at least, I don't know if they're still doing it, but at one point they were doing a garden that was themed or timed to the time of the historic village. So it was only plants and only cultivated like it would be during that, you know, the time period of the historic village. And that always blows people's mind. But I mean, that's definitely a creation care themed thing, and trying to get people to understand that. And that's something that the community can consume and be engaged in. And that they're doing a great job of educating people on that.
And now we do, I think, more than 50% of the continuing education that happens on campus through the continuing education project happens at the Mayborn. And that's a shift in the last few years. But some of it is about where does your food come from. It's about nutrition education, it's about urban gardening, it's about all of those things. We can do it because we have that over there. Also, the Texas Master Naturalist is in charge of that garden now. So that's a community thing. They're getting something by, it's their volunteer project. They have to do that to receive their certification, and it helps us because we don't have time to be out there all the time. So yeah, there are models set up, there are partnerships, even if it's having a symposium over there about Waco sustainability.
That's great.
Yeah.
My name's Sarah. I can't see you when I'm sitting down, so I'm standing. I'm Sarah, and I am an Oregonian. I apologize. But my church does not recycle, so I've been very excited to see what's happening in Waco and on Baylor. Like little touches all around campus. It's awesome. Thank you. And Oregonians don't have it all figured out by election. I'm wondering if the city and the campus have done anything about food and sustainability. That's my question.
We do have a partnership. We've got actually a number of different partnerships with the city. We've got a group on campus called Campus Kitchen. Yeah. That group rescues food from our residence hall cafeterias and takes it across the street to Salvation Army. So they get a viable food source on a consistent basis. We've got a university garden that we use not just for our classes, but we bring in community classes, and they're school kids to continuing ed, to a number of different ways that we're using that garden. And then we also work with a group downtown. A number of our professors and classes work with a group downtown, a nonprofit called Mission Waco and Urban REAP. I think you probably took the tour. That's a partnership that really, we've got a couple environmental science professors that were really responsible for making that a reality. And so just a number of ways that we've kind of worked with food waste. And then for food insecurity, at least for our students, we've got a food insecurity working group that has about 30 people on it from all over campus. And we get a donation of food from a local church. They come on campus and do a free farmers market, and that's kind of really exploded on our campus as far as food insecurity and food access options. And so I may be missing some.
The
But
one thing that I was thinking of that Baylor does is they administrate this organization called the Texas Hunger Initiative, which is all grant funded, but the Baylor administrates that, and they're housed at Baylor's campus, and that's a statewide organization, but has a really strong presence here as well that addresses issues of food insecurity, and really brings educations to communities across the state on how to leverage federal dollars for hunger programs, and has worked collaboratively with Meals on Wheels, a local organization called the Hunger Farm, World Hunger Farm, which is a
World Hunger Relief.
World Hunger Relief, which is a farm here in town, and has kind of been and is growing even in their presence as a kind of backbone organization for hunger issues. And Baylor is the steward of that. I mean, they office at Baylor, and I don't think Baylor really, if they contribute much funding, maybe some in-kind stuff, but they're really grant-based. But Baylor was willing to take them on and administrate that grant, and has been a huge partner in really transforming a lot of Texas communities, but including Waco.
Absolutely.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Ben. I'm an MDiv student here. I think I have 1,000 questions. Thank you all for being here. And Smith, my question is more directed to you. I don't know anything about public policy, and I don't want to ask a question about the city bureaucracy or anything.
Nobody does.
As far as thinking about Baylor and the checks that you kind of put in place, and then thinking in light of the timeline that has been sped up by the IPCC report that recently came out saying we have to make radical changes by 2030 if we want to avoid certain levels of climate change. And so in thinking about that and the fact that we're not talking about sidestepping this altogether, but how bad the effects are going to be, and thinking from the perspective, I'm glad you brought it up this way, of loving our neighbor, and using the city of God in Revelation as the picture for what that's supposed to look like, and recognizing that the city in that time would have been intimately connected to the locations outside of it, the agricultural communities outside of it, as Dr. Davis presented last night. I didn't know if you had any kind of ideas or what you felt like Baylor was going to take up in the next few years to really crack down on some of the emissions, and this is not to relativize the program that you've already put in place. I think Baylor's doing a better job than most of the other schools that I've attended. But just in light of those things, in light of the fact that agriculture as it's produced in America is unsustainable in and of its very self, that Baylor draws a large crowd of students who rely on fossil fuels to get here, whether that be by air, et cetera. In light of the emissions costs, Baylor as itself is very unsustainable, just as every large institution currently is. I didn't know if you could talk through that a little bit about the way you're conceiving of that and the way you see forward.
So your question is, what are we doing to address the impending doom as much as we can, essentially?
Yeah, that's
okay. So we actually have, in 2015, I wrote and somehow miraculously got passed across the university. It was something called the Sustainable 2020, which are 4 goals that we are hoping to achieve by the year 2020. That involves, we want to increase the amount of locally sourced food that we have in our dining halls, because we do see, working with Airmark, our Baylor Dining Services, our vendor, we do see that as a need and as an issue. So we want to increase the amount of locally sourced food. We want to decrease the amount of water that we waste or use. We want to increase our diversion rate, which is how much we how much we keep from going to the landfill. And then, probably more to your point, we want to decrease our emissions by 15% by 2020. We are on target to reach all of those goals. 2020 is just 2 years from now, so what's the next step? That's what I always get asked in sustainability, what are you doing next? And I think really beyond that, it's setting another set of goals that maybe even are more difficult to achieve. I've got in mind something that I think that we really should be doing, but we don't, and I've tried for several years. One of it is I think we should have a no idling rule on campus. I can't help people coming from Oregon to here I love the irony of people. I mean, I go to sustainability conferences, and I love the irony of people flying from Oregon to Waco for a conference about creation or sustainability. I totally get it, but you also have to think about the long-term good some of that does. We can't keep people from coming from out of state here, but there are things that we can do, such as cutting idling, because that is a huge problem, as Megan will tell you. I mean, and that's something that we do all the time. If you walk across campus at any point, you'll see some of our facility guys literally just sitting in their car for no reason, and I'll say to them, "Hey, what? Turn the car off," and they'll say, "Well, it's hot," or "I'm cold," and it's like, well, then go inside the building, you know? And I think those are going to be the next step. There are going to be a lot of battles. It sounds like it'd be something easy to do, but these are things that are really going to radically change some of people's day-to-day lives beyond just these 2020 goals. And I think that's what I've got coming in my future, because I do think, we don't really I don't want to preach a gospel of the apocalypse. That's not my job, and I don't think it helps. I mean, how old is Earth Day, and we still nobody cares about it. But here at Baylor, people do care about caring for God's creation. You know what I mean? And I think that we can connect climate change, and I do connect climate change and what's coming to that kind of stuff. And I think that's what we've got in our future. Some more difficult conversations, I think, than some people maybe are prepared to have. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's a huge conversation that touches 1,000 things. So
right.
I appreciate your answer.
But the public education, the public dissemination of information, I think is important there. Because otherwise, as you've noticed, people will just call you the idling police.
Right.
Yeah, and as the interventions that you're asking for become more and more inconvenient, it's like the time to get people on board is when their inconvenience level is lower. And if they're already on board, then when the bar is raised,
right,
you're already in their head.
I mean, if I could just be frank with everybody here, I mean, my ultimate goal for the university, not just for sustainability, but for the university, would be for them to talk about sustainability outside of the month of April or outside of the time that we get recognized nationally. Yeah. Because those are the only two times we get any sort of press from the university. And I think that's got to change if we're really taking judicious stewardship seriously. And I think I'm irritating enough that eventually I will get to that point. But that's the thing that drives me the craziest, is we only talk about it in April on that one specific day, on Earth Day, which, half the people here don't even care about. And then the other time is when we get some sort of national recognition. And so if we could change that, that would be a game changer for the university. I think that probably speaks more to your point than your point.
That could be a powerful expression of our Christian mission.
That's exactly right.
Boy.
I'm Lori, and I work here at Baylor. I'm new to, I've been in Waco only 2 years. I came here for the position I have at Baylor, and so thank you so much. This is so encouraging, because I've observed some of these things in the city and had a lot of questions, and it's just so encouraging to hear that the culture on the city council is open to doing, or it's easy to do the right thing, so thank you. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about eliminating the visual and literal divide that I-35 creates. I moved here from Tulsa. There's a long history of the city being divided because of I-244. It was divided racially. The north was primarily by minorities and poor, south more wealthy. But part of the issue of the reconciliation in the city is that there's visually and literally this barrier in the highway. And I kind of see the same thing in Waco. You've got wealthy Baylor on one side of I-35, and then the rest of the city, those people on the other side. So I'm just curious, I really am hopeful, but I want to hear more about the vision of how that might change and access be improved, and both, in our imaginations, but literally that barrier change.
The first thing that's happening that I'm excited about, that's a small step, is I-35 is about to be renovated. It's going to be really painful, and from a city leader's perspective, I feel like we're in a coastal city, and there's a hurricane slowly headed towards our city with this reconstruction that's about to happen. So not looking forward to the reconstruction, but part of the reconstruction is going to make 4th and 5th Street and the overpass and the walkway underneath that overpass much more walkable. The city and Creative Waco, and I think City Center maybe partner to kind of come up with artistic lighting and visuals, and it's really going to be a beautiful space that hopefully will connect. Unfortunately, we can't. I mean, that highway is there, but I'm hopeful that will be a more pedestrian and biking friendly access point to downtown. I think public transportation and communicating that transportation. There's free shuttle rides and Megan has worked really hard. We've at different times had different iterations of public transportation to get to have Baylor students the ability to freely get to downtown and back. And I think continuing to improve that and continuing to make sure that those are available, because there's tension between, okay, are we going to make the tourist in Waco right now, the tourist and the public transportation that they're procuring, which is currently free, a priority, and how do we incorporate Baylor and the student body into that, I think is a really important conversation too. And then disseminating that information out to the students is going to be really, really important. And I think that, so those are two like really practical gateways, I think, of getting students. I think getting students to live downtown. Something that I regret is when I came to Baylor, if you're from Baylor, you know there's a street over here called LaSalle. And when I came to Baylor, no one lived on the other side of LaSalle. No students did. I came here in 2003. And but while I was at Baylor, the other side of LaSalle exploded with student housing. And I was kicking myself. I continue kicking myself. Why I wish the city could have somehow incentivized that development to be more this direction towards downtown instead of that direction. And there's a lot of great things that can happen along that LaSalle corridor, and I'm excited for those. But I really would have preferred that to go downtown. So I think even increasing student housing opportunities in downtown perhaps is another opportunity. There's a student housing opportunity. There's an apartment complex called Heritage Quarters there now that hasn't necessarily been. My understanding is their occupancy rate isn't been what they hoped it would be, and I think there's some management issues there on that. But I think that having good housing stock for students downtown is important too. And then probably the most important thing, and Megan's probably going to have, again, as usual, better answers than me, but I really think making sure students are aware of the cool opportunities in their place downtown, that it is their downtown. I think I remember early on in conversations being like, it always like centered around bars and alcohol consumption, which is always going to be like, Baylor is going to be different from that anyway in most college towns because it has a different culture for consumption of alcohol. It has a culture for consumption of alcohol. It's just different than most college towns. And I'm like, I don't want that anyway. Like, I want like Baylor students to be really aware of the art scene in downtown and the restaurant scene and the retail scene and the farmers market scene and all of these other like robust things. And so I think that there really is a need for communicating that well to the university. And we've tried to really work strategically about, okay, at orientation, like, can we have a seat at the table to be like, this is your downtown, this is your role, like, get here, and like really trying to like pump that out as much as we can. So,
Student Activities has done, I think super brilliantly, a partnership with the Hippodrome to offer documentary films on Mondays. And there's no charge for the film. So not only do Baylor students benefit and get sucked into downtown to participate in that, but also you've got this great quality of film that's available to people from the community. I love the accidental meeting of students and community members. Another thing that I've noticed just myself more frequently, and I've been doing it, is I'm on campus now walking because the riverfront, the Riverwalk makes a loop. And so now, my friends and I will go and walk that loop, where I was really never on campus unless I was, coming to a thing. So I think that just familiarity, right? We know this. Familiarity makes so much more possible in terms of relationship.
Absolutely.
And so it's not just about students being out in the community, it's about members of the community being on campus and feeling familiar. I mean, every time I come on campus, I have to look at a map and be like, okay, am I gonna, I'm gonna get it wrong. And so if it's slightly intimidating for me, how much more so is it gonna be for other community members who have less familiarity? But if we can make those physical connections pleasant and easy. I know that there was a land use study that Baylor did that looked at the riverfront And I think we have an opportunity as we develop the riverfront. There's a strip of land that's really park space. So there will be mixed-use development, but only up to the edge of that park space. And so the way that we program, not just build, but program that park space has the opportunity to create, activity breadcrumb connections all along the riverfront that then can be accessible from both sides of the river, from both sides of the highway. And then I think I wonder about some of the cultural opportunities at Baylor being more marketed towards people in the community. I mean, there are just incredible music and theater, main productions, but also just little kind of one-off student experiment productions that I think people from the community would enjoy. But I think we have to tell that story, and people from the community need to feel like they're invited.
That's right.
And let me just tell you, putting out an email or putting out a Facebook post for lots of people in the community, that's still not an invitation.
No.
For people to really feel like you mean them, we need to go where they are and communicate in ways where they feel comfortable. And so I think if that's something that we're really serious about, then we need to start doing stuff.
I'm sorry. I just want to say, I can't believe neither one of these guys have said anything about it, but it's definitely changed in the last 2 years because of McLean Stadium.
Yes.
I mean, we've got more people walking from downtown, riding the shuttle from downtown to Baylor's campus, even after the game or during halftime, depending on how the season's going, from McLean Stadium to those eateries, and so much more foot traffic. And a lot of that needs to be helped just because we don't have the infrastructure right now because of I-35. And so I've seen a lot of that change just recently. But I would also say, he talked about student housing. For me personally, I'd love to live on or near campus, but there's very
family neighborhoods.
There are no family neighborhoods. There's no adult housing, as I would call it. And so I can't move in down here. I go to the gym down here. I work down here. My kids go to school down here. But I live in the suburbs because there's nowhere here for us to really look at as a viable place for us. And so
I'll show you some
I was
lots.
going to say, Dillon can help you
I don't
with
want to build. My wife would go crazy. But that would be great if we could have more of that. But I think that stuff is coming. I think it really is.
So two things. One is I just want to reiterate, if there are Baylor folks in the crowd, I think that the Mayborn does a really good job of trying to engage the community and engaging the community. But from the cultural things in the theater or whatever, all of the things, there are, especially low-income minority communities in Waco, don't believe it's their thing. They don't believe they're invited, and they will tell you that. They're like, that is not our thing. Like, that is not our place. And so I would just like to even open the opportunity to say, like, one of the things the city has a lot of is facilities. It has libraries, community centers, and so if we can do pop-up exhibits and then just like try to draw, whatever it is, like whatever, I'm not the expert that knows what it looks like to draw in low-income families onto campus for experiences, but I do know that right now, I think, and there's probably been so much traction and fruit from that, but there's still a gap. And I think there's always going to be, like, a very expensive private school with beautiful spaces is going to have difficulty connecting with low-income minority communities and vice versa. And that is always going to be a challenge, but I think that there is opportunity there. I think that there's already, obviously, a lot of good work being done on this. But I'll just say from a city perspective, I would love to engage in that conversation. And if you're at Baylor and have vision for that, like, talk to me, and I would love to do what I can to help because I do think that there's a need for that. And Smith brought up a really good point on the housing in the neighborhoods. It really is Waco. If you're in Waco proper, you can be in some really nice neighborhoods and throw a baseball and hit a really what some would deem like a really more socioeconomically disadvantaged neighborhood. So it's really tough to find, but I think it's really important that we are working strategically to make neighborhoods more accessible to families and think critically about how we're doing that. So let's keep talking about that too, because I think it's really, really important that we find a pathway towards you and your family feeling like there is a place for you in the core of the city. And and if there's work that needs to be done there, let's like start doing that work.
Yeah, and I think that part of the thing is just success doesn't mean making more people look and act like us.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the case, then we also have to be able to be us with somebody else being them.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm not sure I'm even making sense, but
You are.
like, if it makes sense for Baylor to be Baylor and the city to be the city, it also makes sense for me to be me, but to go into other neighborhoods not expecting to change them, but expecting to enjoy them for who they are. And I think that it's really important. You know, one of the things that a neighborhood member mentioned to me about developmental changes in East Waco was, she said, you know, right now, this is a neighborhood that feels like it's for us, and I don't worry about whether my son is going to be suspected of ill intent walking down the street. Those are the kinds of worries that people have about being on campus, about being across the river. And I think that there are opportunities. I think, yes, the training wheels for this is going where people are. But I still think that aspirationally, a place to get to is a place where people don't feel like Baylor is not a welcoming place for them.
No, totally agree. Totally agree.
That's excellent.
Question right there.
Yes, Yeoman.
Thank you so much for all of this. Really appreciate it. And it's going to continue through this conversation you guys just signed now. I guess some background. I am a Baylor grad. I actually live at Heritage Quarters.
Oh, awesome.
The management is not good, but unfortunately. So having graduated, and now I live in Durham, North Carolina, which in some ways are engaging similar issues. And so I'm going to bring something in from there that I've been hearing about to address this particular issue. So a lot of talk about gentrification. So an issue in Durham is that because Duke University is there, because lots of people are moving in and the city's changing, gentrification does happen a lot. And what ends up happening is that these homes for middle-class Americans, predominantly white Americans, these neighborhoods that are developing end up shoving out the African-American, Latino communities farther and farther out or in other places. And so in some sense, to put it crudely, segregation kind of happens in that sense. And this is, like I just can walk out my neighborhood, go down a couple streets, and it's obvious. So I'm wondering if that's a concern for Waco too, since Baylor's here, gentrification is something that's going on, and like Waco has a huge Latino American Hispanic community that could be distanced further just spatially because of that, which like we can be as welcoming as we want, but that distance could create huge difficulties. And so, and I am a theology student, which means I usually don't know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so I guess that's kind of where I'm coming from. And there's issues of like redlining in the city and Durham. So yeah.
I'm gonna let Megan field this, but this is another hurricane that I feel like you just kind of slowly see inching towards Waco. So, but the answer is yes, but I think she's best equipped to answer that.
So that is why I get out of bed in the morning. And I'm excited because I think Smith's like, damn it, she's going to talk a long time.
Yeah, you could see she was like winding up. Here we go.
And I could stick around and let people escape and talk to you about it more. But so a couple of things. Number one, gentrification happens when somebody abandons the field. When property values are so low and the surrounding values are so high that you can come in and buy and increase values quickly. So one of the things that we need to make happen is for property values to increase as slowly as possible. And I am not afraid to put the brakes on development, and I think we as a community can afford to do that. I think one of the things that happens is people who are white and privileged see a neighborhood start to look like they would want to spend time there, and they call that success. When that is the literal definition of failure for people in the community. Seeding things that people don't want to move next to, right? Seeding affordable housing seeding smaller scale development helps to prevent the McMansion kind of thing from happening. But really, so in East Waco, where there's a real fear, there are a couple of things that we're doing. We define gentrification in our office just sort of arbitrarily. We define gentrification as bad and revitalization as good. And we say that you can revitalize without gentrifying if you work on 3 different things. There are imbalances in profit, so that the profit from the change accrues to people in the community, not people from out of the community. Information, so that the information about what is happening and how to act on it is held by people in the community, not exclusively people from outside the community. And then the culture that is created with the change is the culture of the people in the community, not the people outside of the community. And so what we're working to do is to support and empower community members to profit, to inform, and to identify and build up their culture. And we're doing that in a few ways, but the biggest thing I think right now is that the community already feels like the battle's been lost. There have been a few kind of high-profile developmental changes, and everybody is, you know, we've been around talking about this for a year and a half, saying, get in there, get in there, get in there, get in there. Now that dirt's starting to turn, the sky is falling, and we've lost the battle. So I'm literally having this conversation with well-meaning white people all the time. Stop having good ideas. Just stop. If you have a good idea, just put a pin in it, because we are not going to do another thing without the neighborhood understanding what that thing is and choosing to move forward with it. I get it. I appreciate that people want to be part of the solution, but it's not our solution. And one of the things that I think has got to be essential is that the neighborhood, who is so mistrustful for so many good reasons, they have to outnumber me in the meeting big time, right? It's got to be 10 of them and 1 staff person, or maybe 2. And we have to move at the speed of trust. When people feel like they've got it on this particular issue, that's when we can move forward to the next issue. And they're going to tell me how fast we move. And people who have privilege are used to getting things done. But people who don't have privilege are used to having things done to them. So speed of moving forward is something that I'm really comfortable with, but it's the definition of powerlessness for the community. And so it's really hard to take, especially people who are really well-meaning and want to like fix gentrification real quick so that we can like feel like we've done the right thing. We just have to slow down, and it's very, very uncomfortable. But being a theology student, sometimes you just have to sit with the discomfort.
And just kind of undergird all that that goes without saying, I guess, but because you're a theology student, because this is the largest Baptist university in the world, I would just say at the heart of all this, at least from my perspective, is racial reconciliation. And that is so often left out of this whole process. It's left out of the conversation. And I mean, we all go to the same gym. This gym just opened up in East Waco, and the number of people, good people that I've had conversations with that don't understand the culture or the community of the new street, and brought in their preconceived fears or ideas of what that area was going to be like. These are God-fearing, church-going people, but they just have this ingrained in them, and you have to have this conversation with them, especially if they're Christ followers, and say, hey, look, we've got to come to the table. It's not just about gentrification for us as Christians. It's about a whole other world. We've got to go to our neighbor as a follower of Christ and approach them in that way. And then that goes into some of this other real world stuff. So
I think history, you have to start with history and how history informs cultures. And I think that there really is such long, complex histories and how that's informing all of the players in this. But I'll speak really briefly to the practicals. Some of the things the city has done. One is funding Megan's organization, which is really Eat, Sleeping, and Breathing, like she said, revitalizing downtown, bringing healthy, good, strong business into downtown, and also monitoring all of the cultures in the neighborhoods around there and in downtown. And Megan is just the perfect person who gets it and gets what getting a high-rise with Class A office space in the downtown core means for and advocates for that, while simultaneously fighting the gentrification fight for those not from Waco or maybe even new to Waco, Elm Avenue is a commercial corridor in the traditionally black part of the city that is recently seeing a lot of new development, not primarily, but including with white developers that have not done that ever. And so funding this organization that is really fighting for the right kind of development throughout our city. Another thing that the city is talking through practically is what does it look like to have mixed income housing in our communities? There are federal grants that make federal mixed income housing really work for the developer. It's not like someone's sacrificing in this, and we've traveled to Fort Worth to see these like really awesome mixed income housing developments where I don't know, like somewhere between 70 and 80% of the housing stock is market, and then 20 to 30% is affordable, and it's managed really well. And no one knows who's mixed income, who's getting the subsidy and who's not. The developer gets it just by hitting that percentage point from the federal government. So they're incentivized. They're getting just as good of a profit as they would if they didn't do mixed income, but it secures there to be that affordable housing stock in your core so people don't get pushed out. So really like looking at land banking and bringing in developers and talking through that. We have a couple projects that we have done that on already and are looking to expand that. And then I think the communication piece, and this is really something that Megan does. I mean, Megan has a huge sign on the side of her office that says, have questions about Avenue development, come in here and ask us. And really thinking through, and the city's doing this as well, how do we communicate? Because to me, to fight the negative implications of gentrification while experiencing revitalization, two of the practicals that I've come up with is affordable housing stock and then really good communication strategies to the community so that they can engage. So those are a couple of the practical things we're doing.
One final question.
I'm an intern here at Baylor, and I'm just wondering, administration intern, and I'm just wondering if the communication departments and the education department have come to help on these issues of mixing the community, maybe going into schools and bringing some of the school children in would be a way to, and then the communication experts that are here might have some good ideas on how to make that continuum available for students who exit in and out.
Yeah. And I think we've had some kind of one-offs, but I think coming up with a way to make each effort build on itself in successive classes and semesters, I think that's a real opportunity that's yet to be explored.
That's right.
Well, do you want to get one more? If you all are good.
We're good.
I want everybody's time. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. My name is Claire. I'm a junior here at Baylor and a student leader in my residential community. And I say that because my question is about relating to these initiatives and also to the communication issue that we keep coming back to. Are the students aware of what you guys are trying to do? Has it been considered to utilize the residential communities that are on campus to cultivate and foster these attitudes towards sustainability? Because I know I myself was a student and really invested in this question and have had conversations with many other student leaders who are also invested. But our perspective is so short that I'm so thankful to hear how much progress we've made in areas like recycling, but that's not something that I would see as a student unless it was presented to me, for instance, right now. So, but there's so much energy in these communities that we want to pour back into Baylor and we want to pour back into Waco, but we just don't really know where to go to do that. So have you considered utilizing those on-campus communities to begin fostering that attitude so that even when students do move off campus, they can carry that with them? And where can we direct students, and particularly underclassmen, to get them plugged into those initiatives?
You can direct them to me. Yeah, we do. I regularly work with the LLCs primarily to take on initiatives. Brian Thomas in engineering leads one over, and I guess he's in Earl or Teal, one of those. And so, that's actually an example of a project that we started working on 3 years ago, where he and his wife talked about being faculty in residence in East Village, and eventually they got approved. They moved in, and then the mountains that we had to move to get them space to make the gardens that they have out there, that his residents now cultivate and you know, do that kind of stuff. His residents also go on campus and volunteer. And so, you know, that's a partnership that we put some time into. I think the thing that students don't understand is how difficult it is to get all of the departments, not only at the same table, but to get them to agree to something that sounds very simple, and it is very simple. But it's because they are only, I mean, a lot of these departments, especially if they're student-driven, student activities is a good example, really look at it as a year-to-year thing. Mm-hmm. They're looking at their one-year calendar, yep. And then they're looking at, you know, when May rolls around, okay, then what can we do next year? And so trying to get them to plan that far ahead and get some integration there is really a difficult challenge. And I think it's that way at all higher ed campuses. We do have student groups on campus that students can get involved in. I've got a student advisory board that reports to me, 30 or 35 students from all different disciplines. They volunteer with Keep Waco Beautiful. They have a park that they've adopted, in-camera park, that they keep clean and do a bunch of different stuff. They email people when I need students to complain about stuff. They did it the other day because the sprinklers were on. And guess what? They turned them off because students emailed, not because of me. So there are opportunities I'd be happy to talk to you about afterwards. It is tough, though. I understand what it feels like.
I would say you have a very special opportunity in an honors residential college, and as much as a lot of those, a good number, I don't know the percentages on this, but a good number of folks will stay all 4 years. Mm-hmm. And there is a sort of culture building mm-hmm. phenomenon there that is very strong, and a lot of those were found in the residential colleges. And I would say you're about ready to have a new faculty steward come on in January of 2019 that you know really well, named Jason Witt. So these are the sorts of things that you lift up to him and say, let's look at the life that we have together, mm-hmm. and let's think about the ways in which we can really ground this in our Christian convictions, and what does that mean practically mm-hmm. in the way of some of these questions. And look at what we're doing and how can we begin to change. And these small moves make a big difference. They really do. But you all have a chance to do that. And then as people go out into the world, they've got a different imagination. I would say that. One more question. Are you all good with that?
Yeah, we're good.
Good.
Just going back to the previous conversation, I think the conversations that have happened recently at Historic Waco Foundation mm-hmm. have been, I think, a really good example of it's a progressive conversation mm-hmm. about the history of Waco and how it's been told and how we can do a more complete telling of Waco history. Mm-hmm. But it's about letting other people talk. Mm-hmm. And I found myself having to keep my mouth shut on my own accord just so that other people could talk. Mm-hmm. And that was good for me. Just for a second, to keep my mouth shut and listen to other people's experience. Mm-hmm. But, so for that organization, it's not a radical conversation, really. But for that organization, mm-hmm. it's radical. And the shift that's happened in that organization the last 2 years, I think is a very healthy one, motivated by their desires in the organization to survive. If they don't change, they will not survive. They own and run and interpret 4 different houses in Waco. But that's an example. Yeah, it's a progressive conversation, but more than that, it's Christian love. That's mm-hmm. what we're talking about. Yeah. It's sharing the air.
Are you on the board for that?
No.
You're just involved. I really appreciate what you said, and I'm loosely familiar with that. I think you're exactly right. I think that there's a fear sometimes, though, because Historic Waco Foundation, their story has really been on the white Victorian history of Waco. It's been very limited, and it hasn't been comprehensive. And I think there's been a real fear to dredge up some potential difficult subject matters that are part of our history, as they are part of any city's history. And I think Waco as a city has a little PTSD because they have some really dark history, unusually with the Koresh thing probably being the most nationally well known, that they really are just like, we don't want to talk about the bad because everyone else does. But I think that honestly in this time in our city's history, there really is some security in who we are as a city. There's some really things to be proud about. So now's the time to be like, let's tell the whole story and embrace it for what it is, and celebrate the things that are triumphant, and mourn and learn from the things that every city has made a mistake, that other cities have made similar mistakes on, and move forward. And so I appreciate that, and I think that your words, and I think that that type of conversation, I believe, is very maturely being had throughout the city, although it's sometimes with struggle and difficulty. There really is a pretty ruthless commitment by community leaders to go there in a collaborative spirit for people to listen, and for people to say, that doesn't seem intuitive for us to be having this conversation, but I think it's right. I'm going to hear you out on it, and we'll go from there. And so I think that I'm really proud of where we are as a culture in this town. Not saying that it's not without challenges or difficulties, but as long as it's not a landfill at stake, that there's usually some maturity at the table. Just kidding.
But I think that same progressive Christian love can be said for, that's the sustainability.
That's right.
issue.
That's right. Yep.
That's the green initiative. That's the, what can we do? How can we have conversations from the right angle?
You should come to my chapel in April.
Yeah.
That's what I talk about.
I'll definitely.
And it's all around, let's stop throwing things away. Let's stop discounting things. Let's stop selecting only some things as valuable, because the sustainable thing is for everything to be used.
That's good.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks for having us.
As great as I thought this would be, it turned out to be even that much better. And we wish we had more time, but you all are welcome to stay and engage in more questions. I think about the fact that Baylor University was begun out in the middle of the country in Independence, Texas. Mm-hmm. And by a variety of factors and decisions and events came to Waco on the banks of the Brazos in the 1880s. That was a providential thing, and we were providentially situated. I'm really grateful to have leaders who are servants like Dillon Meek and Smith Getterman and Megan Henderson. Please join me in thanking them.